So yeah, layers are really important, and you always want to work with them. And you have things like masks. Sorry, I skipped this part in the recording. But anyway, I'm going to try adding an adjustment layer. I'll just do something simple like, let's just do brightness contrast. It's fairly intuitive. And I can brighten it up and add contrast with this layer. And by default, it will always add a layer mask. Adjustment layers just always get a layer mask, and that's that icon right there. But like always, there are lots of good options. And incidentally, this icon right here, this is a list of all of the different types of adjustment layers there are. You can apply these directly to pixels. Okay, so if I go to layer 1 here, which is a pixel-based layer, and I think it's basically the bottom layer, more or less. Oh, it's just the sky. Yeah, I'm masking out the sky. We'll talk a little bit more about masking. I'm less concerned with you guys learning. I would like to give you a broad overview without going into anything too difficult right now or too complex, even though you may already, actually masking is not too bad, but you'll pick it up really quickly. So if I go to image and adjustments, I can apply, here's that same exact list. I can apply things, here's levels and curves and brightness and all these things. But it's much, much better to apply them as adjustment layers. This next icon is the add a layer mask icon. And you can add effects. That's what FX always stands for. Effect, FX, I don't know. You can add effects to layers. These tend to look at, if you don't have transparency in your layers, these aren't going to matter very much. Adding a stroke will add a stroke to the edge of this document where the pixels end. Does that make sense? So if like I have her ears, I don't know why I selected out her ears and did this, but if I have her ears, I can add an effect to that. And I don't know, what do you guys want to do? Let's do an outer glow, because that'll look really weird. And then maybe change the color. And we're going to get deep into each of these things. I just kind of want to give you a broad overview. And let's make it opacity screen. Let's do, I don't know, multiply. Sure, why not? And I've added red around her ears. Oh, I need to soften it. Add some spread, add some size. So we can see there it's kind of respecting, remember that what that layer looked like? Is it was just her ears, and it's kind of respecting it. So if I'd applied outer glow to a layer, I'm just going to delete that because it looks terrible. If I'd applied outer glow to a layer that's fully pixelized, like those effects will respect the edges of the document, or the edges of the pixels, if that makes sense. So anyway, so that is the layers menu. The other thing I wanted to discuss with you guys is the first time that you see that resample checkbox. If I go to image size, why don't you guys go ahead and start a new document by going to File, New. Very similar to our old menu. We can kind of specify things like resolution. 300 is what you want to try and create your documents at. You could go down to, the standard values are 200, 266, and 300. 300 is actually, like you saw on those prints, like the difference between 240 and 300 and 266, like you really couldn't tell that big a difference. It was hard to tell. If you really got a magnifying glass and looked at them, you would be able to tell, but not really. Magazines are printed at 266. But to give you some perspective, newspapers are printed at 200. And 300 is just the standard for photographic quality. Color modes. I'm going to cover this a little bit more in depth in a second, but generally never, ever, ever work in a CMYK document. You will pull your hair out trying to get the colors right. It doesn't work. If you're going to CMYK your documents, it's always the last step. So unlike Illustrator, where it really didn't matter if it was Adobe RGB, if it was RGB or CMYK, this really matters. And it matters because Something I will tell you about in a second. Let me get to that in a second. But I want to finish covering this. So you can set, standards, things like that. Pretty standard stuff. You should remember it from last time. The color profile. Let me cover these right quick. There's only a few of these that you should ever use when it comes to RGB. sRGB stands for Simplified RGB. That is for the web. Adobe RGB is, and these are color spaces, by the way. So remember how GIF kind of shrank the amount of colors that we had available to us? Remember how it did that? That's kind of like what this is. This is limiting. It's much more broader. It's not saying like 32. It's still saying like 16 million. It's still much broader, but it's still adding small restrictions onto it. You'll see this whenever you convert a document from RGB to sRGB. It will pick new colors for you, where those colors fall outside of gamut. And are you okay? When they fall out of gamut. So generally, Adobe RGB is a pretty good one to stick with. And these others are legacy. ProPhoto is actually somewhat useful, but who cares? None of these you should really care about. They're all old legacy formats that need to go away, or have some really esoteric use that's not really a thing about it. You don't really need to worry too much about the rest of these settings. If you want to start your document as white, or if you want to start it with the background color or transparent, you can. So let's just go ahead and start it as white, whichever you want. And then from here, image size. We have this dialog box. I'm actually going to go to, I want you to see the dialog box, but I'm just going to go ahead and use my image right quick. The image that I already had open. No, zoom out here. So we can see it in pixels, or we can see it in inches. Wow, this document's really big. Now, look at this. This is very interesting. So it's telling me that I have a 41-inch by 27-inch doc. That's gigantic, right? That's like the side of this wall. But it's only at 100 pixels per inch. You might be tempted. You might be tempted to just type in a 300 right here. But what did I tell you not to do? I told you not to resample. And by default, this resample checkbox is turned on. So I'm going to uncheck it. And watch what happens to the lock icon. Now all three of these are locked together. They're all related. This is something that you're going to learn more about in future digital media classes when you get into Nyquist theorem and stuff like that. But for now, I want you to know this, that they're all related. Because watch what happens. If I change it back to 100, notice my width goes way up. If I change it back to 300. That's because I only have so many pixels. I'm not creating pixels unless I check that resample checkbox. But what if you wanted to go the other way with it? What if this document was too big and you wanted it to go down? And again, just to be clear, you can go up and down by about 10%. And one of these options is percentage. Why does it say 99? That's weird. And if you did 110%, that would be okay. Some images have enough sharpness that you can kind of push it a little bit, but not very much. Be really careful about it. I would never take off for just a minor increase like this, but when it gets pretty when you're downloading images from the web, it's going to be like the kitten. Like those are the instances when I really care. So I'm going to change that back to inches right quick. Oops, now it's at 110 inches. I'm going to hit escape because I don't want a 110-inch document. That would actually take too long to load. Let me just restart real quick. So another option of looking at it is in terms of pixels. If you're saving for a website, you might want to consider how many pixels are on the monitors themselves. These monitors, I think they're 2500 by 1400, something like that, with some change. I think 2560 or something like that. What about the phones? Anybody happen to know what the resolution of these phones are? I don't know. So this is an iPhone 6S, no 5S. I don't know. I totally don't care about new things from Apple. I'm tired of them making new things and making me want them. Um, but what about the other way with it? You know, it's okay to go the other way with it. Let's think about that for a second. Because if I zoom in, and if I really zoom in to like the pixel level, and incidentally, if you start to zoom in a lot, you'll get what Photoshop likes to refer to as the pixel grid. And that's this grid that you guys are seeing. If you don't want that, you simply go to View and go to Show, I think. And then, oh yeah, uncheck pixel grid. So that's one of the things that in the View menu that Illustrator like to do. It like to change the word from show and hide. But Photoshop uses check marks. Okay. So you can see that pixel grid just went away. So I have lots of pixels in here. And there's some noise going on in here, but we'll learn about that later. If I wanted to shrink this image down, think about the decision I would have to make in terms of what pixels to throw away. That wouldn't be as hard as it would be to create new pixels, would it? If you literally had to pick pixels out, you don't have to do that ever. If I literally had to do it, it'd be much, much easier. And Photoshop is fine with downsampling. It does a fine job. As long as you're not doing it to an extreme, and it's hard to say exactly where that would be, but as long as you're not taking like an 11 by 17 document and making it a 2-inch by 2-inch document, like if you throw that many pixels away, like that's like you're not really going to be able to tell what the image is at the end. So as long as you're not going to a crazy extreme, you can downsample. That's okay. So in the instance where I would want to make this image smaller, and let me just change some settings here because I want to. So this is like roughly a 14 by 10 document. I can check resample, and I can make this smaller. Let's say 5 inches by 3 inches. This is perfectly okay. Making things smaller, perfectly okay. Creating pixels, bad. Deleting pixels, okay. Well, at least in this case, downsampling. I'm going to go ahead and click cancel. I just mostly wanted you guys to have an open document to see this dialog box with me. You don't need to worry about any of these settings in here, but they do exist. There's kind of like different methods for resampling, but if you leave it on automatic, honestly, it will do a fine job.